So thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar focused on identifying housing resources for coordinated access. And we'll go to the next slide. My name is Morrison and I'm the director of Built for Zero Canada and one of the co-presenters for today's webinar, along with Jody Yurkowsky Pace, who is the coordinated access trainer with the training and technical assistance arm of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Jody, just want to say hi and tell folks what you're going to be doing on the webinar.
Absolutely. I just want to say hi, and I am here to support, and I'm running the technology and adding some of my thoughts on coordinated access and the subject that we're going to be talking about today. So hello to everybody that I recognize, and looking forward to it.
Great. Thanks, Jody. So Jody will be watching the chat and the questions that come in for sure. Just wanted to say that the Alliance leads a national movement of individuals, organizations, and communities working together to end homelessness in Canada and includes these 5 key initiatives. Again, Jody and myself work with the Built for Zero Canada and the training and technical assistance who take the lead in by name list and coordinated access training and technical assistance for reaching home designated communities across Canada. The by name list and coordinated access training and technical assistance are funded in part by the Government of Canada through the CCI funding stream of Reaching Home. And this webinar today is part of a series of monthly webinars and community practice calls taking place between the fall of 2019 and March of 2022. The fall calendar is now out and you can find all the webinars and community practice calls, both those coming up and the previous ones, on the Canadian Alliance Training and Technical Assistance website site. We also want to make you aware that the Canadian Alliance toolkits hosted on the Built for Zero website under resources have information and connections with community examples and for all things by name list and coordinated access. And so you can find those there on that website. And we'll just do a bit of housekeeping before we get going. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out later today to everyone who registered, and it will also be shortly included on the training and technical assistance website previously mentioned. And also just to say, everyone on the call today is muted, but you are of course encouraged to ask questions throughout, and you can do that using the question function of Zoom. We can see that there. All right, we are going to be asking some polling questions today throughout the webinar. So we will ask you to pull out your phone now and go to the Zeetings as outlined in this slide. And Jody is also going to put that link into the chat box. And Jody, did you want to give them a few more instructions about getting onto Zeetings?
Yeah, so I've put the address in the chat box for you, and it's www.zeetings.com/TTACAEH. It's important to make sure that you put that in the URL rather than the Google search bar. If you do it in the Google search bar, you'll get something, but it's not what we're looking for, so make sure you put that in the URL. So if you go there, you will see that it says presenting. And I see that a number of people are already there. We've got 13 folks already on, but we're gonna give it time for a few more of you to get in there. So welcome.
So you'll see that in the chat. We'll maybe go on to the next slides, but then we'll come back. And before we get right into the polling, we'll make sure all the folks are set up on Zeetings there. So in terms of our agenda today, we're almost through the introduction, and then we're going to move into the polling fun, and we're going to move through this material using a bit of a question and answer format using Zeetings, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. What we are hoping that you leave with today is an increased understanding of coordinated access resource inventory, some tips and tools for getting started to develop your coordinated access resource inventory or to strengthen your existing one, and to answer any outstanding questions or challenges as it relates to identifying and documenting housing resources for coordinated access. Someone just said that they have missed the last part of the link, and again, I think
it's in the chat.
The link for Zeetings is in the chat, so if you just open up the chat function, you'll see it in there. All right, so let's center ourselves first in the role of of where housing resources fit in coordinated access. So here is the reaching home definition of coordinated access. Coordinated access is a way for communities to bring consistency to the process by which people experiencing or at risk of homelessness access housing and related services within a geographic area. So it's really about identifying people experiencing or at risk of homelessness and triaging and prioritizing a connection to housing resources to end their homelessness. And we're looking for that to be as efficiently, effectively, safely, and equitably as possible. And a core component is about having clarity and a real-time understanding of the supply of housing resources in your community. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. And implementing coordinated access is really about redesigning the system from a program-centered to a client-centered approach. So in terms of housing resources, this is about having the system move away from silos of information and uneven knowledge to having transparent community agreement about what resources exist and how those vacancies are going to be filled. All right, so we are about to get into the Zeetings. So Jody, how are people doing with getting signed up on Zeetings?
It looks like we've got about half the folks, but my apologies, I was sending the link to the panelists and not the attendees. So that was my bad, and I apologize for it.
Well,
but it's in there now, and it's been there for a little bit. So if you haven't seen it in the chat, we have 38 of the approximately 65 people on the call in there now. So I see that it's building and people are able to get in. So I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds, and we'll get going.
Yeah, we can give people a few minutes. And then, of course, I think as we move through, you can just, if you didn't get signed on right away, you can sign on and just join in where we're at.
Yeah. All right, maybe what we'll do
is, if for some reason you are really having trouble getting connected to Zeetings, you'll see all the questions and you can follow along as we go.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to move to the first one.
All right. So our first question is, what is a coordinated access inventory? Is it every service in the community or just those participating in coordinated access? Is it an inventory of every housing resource in your community, or is it just those filling vacancies through coordinated access?
Make sure that you press submit when you do it. We see that some responses are coming in now. And you can see it move as you're voting.
So interesting, you got a variety of responses there.
Great. Well, it looks like we have 44% saying a list of every program and service participating in coordinated access. Marie, I'm going to press move forward and see what the answer says.
Reveal the answer that we have there. Yeah. So we have the answer is D. The reaching home definition of a coordinated access resource inventory is a full inventory of housing resources for which access will be formally coordinated through the coordinated access system. So not every resource or service in the community, or even all those participating in coordinated access, generally those who are for access and referral points, but rather it's a full inventory of housing resources for which access will be formally coordinated through the coordinated access system. And this definition comes to us through the Reaching Home Coordinated Access Guide, and you will hear us referencing this guide throughout the presentation. We would also like to note that not only is it a good practice to have this inventory, but if you are a Reaching Home designated community, you will be expected to have one.
Yeah.
But you may be wondering, what is a housing resource?
It's a good question.
Let's move on. Yeah, let's move on to the next question. So what is a housing resource? Is it a permanent housing unit or space? Is it housing subsidy? Is it a case management space? All of the above, or answer A only?
All right. Looks
All
like
right.
resoundingly people are saying all of the above.
Okay, and it is D. We put all of the above and potentially others, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So most often when we say a housing resource, we are meaning a resource that is going to directly result in someone getting housed from your list. So a unit or space, or a subsidy of some kind, or a case management space that is going to help someone to find and or retain housing. But what about the potentially others? Can access to other resources be coordinated through coordinated access? Yes, no, depends, don't know.
We've got a lot of people saying yes. We've got some no's there. Quite a few people sitting on the fence saying depends. And 10% Marie saying, I don't know, let's just move to the next slide. So why don't we do that and see what we come up with.
Okay. So this one was a bit of a trick question, Jody. It's both answer A and C. So both yes, other resources can be coordinated, and it really depends on how you set up your coordinated access system.
Yeah.
So it's possible that you could be coordinating access to every housing and homelessness resource in your community, such as a single point of access for shelter. And some have partially implemented or are thinking of implementing a front door to their shelter, but this is not yet really common in Canada. Other resources to support housing stability could also be coordinated through coordinated access process. So say if you had a food security program or a hoarding support program that dedicated those program spaces and brought those vacancies forward to be filled through coordinated access. But just really, I think the purpose really is to remember that we're looking for those resources that are being coordinated through coordinated access with the goal of ending homelessness.
End homelessness, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So we encourage folks to start with those housing resources, but you know, one of the questions people might have is where do we start? And that brings us to our next question. So where do you start in securing resources to be coordinated? Is it through reaching home, homelessness response providers, resources? And we say that, we mean those that are funded or have a primary mandate to end homelessness. Every housing resource in your community, all of the above, or just A and B?
Let's give people a little bit of chance here. We've got 28 people responding so far. And we've got a lot of people saying all of the above. Go for it. Marie, what do you think?
Well, we would suggest answer E. And the reason we say that is to shrink the change by starting with reaching home funded housing resources if you are funded as a designated community, as well as homelessness response providers, rather than trying to engage every resource at once, especially when those housing resource programs, you know, don't have a goal or a direct tie to ending homelessness. That can sometimes be a bit harder to engage.
What happens is it can get really complicated at that point.
Yeah, and I think when you're just trying to get started. So this is what Reaching Home says, a reminder that if you are a Reaching Home designated community, that those housing resource projects funded through Reaching Home must fill their vacancies through your coordinated access process.
Something that has to happen.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some resources or tools that are helpful for folks or could be helpful. The Binding List and Coordinated Access Scorecard, along with the Provider Participation Tool, which are all in one document, can assist in guiding your efforts. So we're going to be highlighting throughout this webinar those areas of the Coordinated Access Scorecard relevant to housing resources and the Coordinated Access Resource Inventory. If you are a Reaching Home designated community, you can find your scorecards in the relevant change package. So Jody, for Built for Zero communities, that's in the Built for Zero change package. And for those that aren't part of Built for Zero, where can they find the change package?
We have a TTA change package as well on the TTA website. And anybody who is a community that has connection with TTA, either Wally or Quinn or I have reached out, and you have that access.
That's great. So any other community, the scorecards, the guides, and all the other tools are publicly available on the by name list and coordinated access toolkit at the site listed there. All right. So looking now at the coordinated access scorecard, question number 13 focuses on housing resources and identifying community priorities for those resources. In this first question, 13.1, you can see identified progressive engagement of housing resources in your community. So again, if you're a Reaching Home designated community, the first level is to ensure Reaching Home funded housing resources are participating in coordinated access and included in the coordinated access resource inventory. The next level is basic, to engage homelessness response providers, and then advanced is to include other service providers. So those who may serve people experiencing homelessness, but it's not their primary mandate, they're not funded necessarily to do so. And you will see there that we've identified a goal to engage 90% or more of providers. And this is a threshold which is meant to indicate progress over perfection. So you're looking to have the majority participating with continuous improvement to include others. So how will you know when you have reached that threshold? When you complete the Provider Participation Tool tab in the scorecards document, there's another tab that calculates your results for questions in the scorecards as indicated here. So hopefully that is helpful to you. So that brings us to our next question. When we say participation, what does that look like? Does it mean that those programs or providers participate in case conferencing meetings, that they notify the coordinated access contact of their vacancies, that they fill those vacancies with no side doors, or is it just answers B and C?
Let's see those responses so far. Everybody agrees.
No dissenting. Oh, we got some other ideas.
All right, well, it looks like it's pretty overwhelmingly D so far. Now, I don't know if it's just a majority rules thing or you guys really know your stuff. So let's take a look.
Okay, the answer is D, which was both B and C, to notify vacancies and to fill those vacancies through the coordinated access process with no side doors. But others weren't wrong. It can also include answer A, attending case conferencing or matching meetings as well. But again, that will depend on how you've set up your coordinated access in your community. Are you doing matching using a case conferencing model, a shortlist model, or some kind of combination? So that's where the depending comes in. So you can refer to the Reaching Home Coordinated Access Guide on pages 75 to 77 to read more about these different approaches. Now, the next is a very important question. What are the ways you can secure resource participation in your coordinated access system? And we have a whole list here. So you can select J, any of the above, or you can select a number of the ones from above. So you can select multiple ones here. Give a couple more minutes for folks to weigh in. People may be selecting specific ones, so taking a little longer to answer this question.
It's a bit of a list to read through as well. So
it is. It's a long one.
All right. Well, let's move to the next slide to see.
Great. And it's answer J, any of the above. And I think we meant to have it be a really long list to show that there's lots of different ways that you can approach it. So let's walk through some of these ideas. So you can conduct a survey. If you don't know, what all the housing resources are in your community, gathering information like this could be a good place to start to develop that collective understanding about what's out there and what those services offer. You could also gather information by bringing everyone around the table for a discussion. In terms of engaging people though, at some point it is worth doing the rounds and having one-on-one meetings to gather information and discuss concerns and opportunities for participation rather than trying to do everything by large group around the table.
Yeah.
You're also going to want to think about what's in it for me. So you might hear the term with them. You know, what's that rationale? Have you thought about it from that provider's perspective to think about it, what's in it for them from their perspective? And then the other things that we have found to be increasingly important, and Jody, I'm wondering if you're finding this as well, is to bring everyone together though to clarify and identify a common goal and to develop shared guiding principles for coordinated access implementation.
Absolutely. I think that what's really common to the communities that I speak to is that when we start engaging in this way through a coordinated process, it's really important to understand what we're talking about and have that common language. And so even breaking it down to the point where we're saying, okay, what is coordinated access? And for some of the communities on the call, that seems like a million years ago, but for some of the communities that I speak with, it's completely new. And so bringing everybody to get together to really get a sense of what that is, what are those guiding principles, how are we going to do this is so important.
Mm-hmm. Great. But in terms of engagement, and many of you may be familiar with this, we'd like you to also remember the diffusion of innovation model. So you might not get everyone on board at the beginning. What you need though is a few early adopters to be champions in helping to move the process forward in your community. This can really act as a tipping point to encourage and show the way forward for others. So sometimes if you wait for everyone, you may not get going. So we encourage you to start where you are and use what you have and keep moving forward.
Absolutely.
And we also highly recommend documenting the commitment rather than just having a verbal or handshake agreement. The good practice of documenting can also help to mitigate confusion and weather changes in leadership and staffing. So this document can happen in a variety of ways. It could be in a funding agreement or in a memorandum of understanding. Some people have done it in terms of references. But you can find in the Coordinated Access Scorecard Guide community examples noted, and as well you'll see there the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness as part of the Making Zero Count project a couple of years ago created, or last year created, a guide to developing MOUs, which has been linked in here as well, and you may find that helpful. The Coordinated Access Scorecard question 13.1 goes on to encourage you to think about getting that commitment documented. But where should you start in documenting the Coordinated Access Resource Inventory? Brings us to our next question.
It's a good question.
So where do you document it? Is it in the tool provided by Reaching Home? Is it in the provider participation tool? Do you borrow a spreadsheet or a document from another community? Can you create your own? Can it go into your homelessness management information system? For some people, for many, that's HIFIS, or any of the above.
Let's take a look.
Responses are coming in.
Yeah. 75%, 74% say any of the above.
Okay, let's see. Okay, this one was also a trick question. It is all of the above. Reaching Home doesn't provide or require a particular tool for the Coordinated Access Resource Inventory, just that you have one. So let's walk through the provider participation tool and see how that can be of assistance and get you started. So these next three slides are going to walk through the provider participation tool, which is part of the scorecard document in one of the tabs. And we've taken a screenshot of each of the sections in the spreadsheet to really break it down. So this first part is asking you to list those providers that are key to coordinated access in your community. We suggest that you start with homelessness response providers, which you see there as HRP, and then move on to other service providers, the OSP. So again, housing response providers are those that have a primary mandate or funding to end homelessness, and others may serve homelessness, but it's not necessarily their primary mandate, and they're not specifically funded to do so. And then you can identify how they're funded, and this can really help strategize for engagement and to understand leverage points and requirements. Okay, Jody, we're going to go back one slide.
Yeah.
Great. The next part of the provider participation tool looks at who you would identify should be serving as access points by adding or referring to another access point and or updating your by name list or coordinated access list, and those who are currently doing so. So checking both the should and the currently boxes is needed for calculations on the results tab. Here you can see highlighted in blue those providers such as shelters, street outreach, prevention and diversion, and some others such as bylaw. The Royal Canadian Legion and the Indigenous Friendship Center are those that in this fictional community are looking to be resources to add and update their list. So if you look at outreach, we can see that this community is looking for them to use HIFIS, but they aren't yet. So that might be the next action step that this community has. The same with bylaw. There's not currently a process in place for them to update the list, but they're working on that. But we can see that bylaw is not expected to use the common assessment tool in this community. They would refer to another agency to do that. This community has also identified that they are in process of engaging the Royal Canadian Legion and Indigenous Friendship Center. These are other response providers without a direct mandate around ending homelessness. But in this community, they've been identified as important to engage, but perhaps they may look at this as a phase 2 kind of approach, or they may identify that these are really key to in their community to engage right away. So the housing resource programs left in white don't have a role in adding, but some have a role in updating. So wanted just to say that what providers you list, what order you engage those providers, and what role they have will be different and unique to your community. So you fill this out in a way that makes sense to you. The next slide is specific to the Coordinated Access Resource Inventory section. Now those housing resource programs are the ones highlighted in blue now. And here you can identify if they should be and whether they are currently dedicating housing resources to your coordinated access system. So if using for your inventory, if you're using the provider participation tool, you'll also want to list how many of each resource and whether they have any additional housing resources within that program that are not yet connected to coordinated access. So for the rapid rehousing program here, there are 2 workers that can each hold a caseload of approximately 20 people at any given time, so 40 total, and they have secured some short-term housing subsidies with that program. The Housing First program here has 2 workers with a caseload of approximately 10 people each for a total of 20 spaces, and again has some longer-term subsidies associated with that program. There is also a supportive housing building with 30 affordable units and on-site supports. And we can see here the Canadian Mental Health Association, who was an other service provider, as they're not specifically funded or have a primary mandate to end homelessness in this community, but they serve people experiencing homelessness and have dedicated 5 case management spaces and subsidies to be filled through the coordinated access process. Specifically for those who are experiencing homelessness, but who also have a mental health diagnosis. But you can see there that they've checked off that they actually have more resources than they're dedicating to coordinated access right now. So one of the next steps after for this community, which was maybe a pilot, they want to go back and request a dedication of further spaces. So in the provider participation tool, when you look further along, you can see there's also space to document whether vacancies are brought to the coordinated access in a timely way, if their commitment is documented, and whether eligibility requirements or criteria for each have been documented. So this can be a great start for your coordinated access resource inventory and can help you capture current engagement and plan for future engagement in your coordinated access system. We also wanted to point out that in the Coordinated Access Scorecard Guide, it includes HIFIS tips and tricks, and in this case, there's some tips and tricks there for including housing resources in HIFIS. So on to another question, Jody. What should be included in the housing resource inventory? Is it what we saw included just now in the provider participation tool? Is it other information or, as well, or is it both A and B? Which I see now is kind of a question that has a couple of answers. But.
This is where everybody gets to go back to their phones and put in a vote if you want. All right.
So really, everyone is right. Answer C, it's both information in the provider participation tool as well as other information, and eligibility criteria is a must. And so we're going to walk through some of this additional information as suggested in the Reaching Home Coordinated Access Guide. You can start to document this in something else, or you can begin by including some of this additional information in the notes of the provider participation tool, but you will likely want to create a separate, more shareable document as you move forward. So in the Coordinated Access Resource Inventory, you see these tips, and if you can go back just one, so general information, the name of the provider, their address, the type of resources. We go on to the next one. Again, we note what pages in the guide. Access information, so who's the contact, who can be served, the ages, the gender, the accessibility of the units, any specific eligibility requirements and verification processes, and I think really importantly, who is not eligible. So it's really helpful to clarify who is not eligible, and again, any verification processes and any documentation that is needed. And then other information could include income, what's the contribution or the financial income thresholds that are required, any service conditions, and any conditions under which a client could be service restricted and for how long.
One of the things that I really suggest to my communities is to make sure that whoever is filling this out goes to the source to ask these questions, because if you've been working in a community for a lot of years and you believe you hold a lot of the information, you may be surprised once you start talking to the service providers about what they actually provide. And we did this exercise in a community where everybody thought they knew what everyone else was doing. And oh boy, when we started to actually explore it, everybody thought they knew, but nobody actually did. So it's a great exercise.
That's a great point. And I think to the point of making sure everyone is on the same page and kind of holds the same information.
Yep.
Yeah. So the Coordinated Access Guide from Reaching Home also offers this tip that if you can get some additional data such as current occupancy rates, average turnover rates, how long clients stay engaged, that can also be helpful information to the system.
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
All right. Sorry about that. Let's skip forward. Okay. So you'll see here that the next question, 13.2, does ask for each housing resource in the Coordinated Access Inventory have eligibility requirements been documented? And so it says yes, and then to use the provider participation tool to help answer that question. So if we go to the next slide, you can see here where in the provider participation tool you can look to see whether those boxes are checked off. All right, I think also you will, as you think about like what kind of a document to put this in and how to share it, that really thinking about who needs the information from this resource inventory to be available so that your system works effectively. So know who needs it. Is it your matching table? Is it those folks that are trying to prepare people on the list for offers of housing resources? So thinking about how do you get this important information out to the right people. And we have one more question. Eligibility criteria should be minimized, true or false?
I'm going to wait for a little bit longer to get some more participation here. Here we go. Okay, well, 70% say true, Marie.
Okay. And we think the answer is true. So let's look at what the Reaching Home Coordinated Access Guide has to say about this. So one of their tips is they are encouraging to keep it low barrier. So the goal is to remain as low barrier as possible, to really think about, are there any unnecessary minimum admission requirements? And then to also think about having all of the rules of admission written down so that there's no surprises as you're trying to make matches and realize someone saying, oh, they can't accept them into the program. Like, all of that should be well known and documented from the get-go, again, so everyone's on the page. And again, really looking to eliminate those side doors. They also encourage that providers do not use secondary vetting processes, that all of your processes are really built into your coordinated access processes so that there aren't trial stays or having potential clients meet and greet existing tenants or additional assessments to determine fit or readiness.
It really is about trusting your system.
Yeah, and we see this in the coordinated access scorecard as well. So in question 13.2, the advanced element is having all participating providers minimize that mandatory eligibility and intake criteria to only what is absolutely required. So for example, by law or by funders. So again, we can accelerate progress for folks into housing and end their homelessness as quickly as possible. All right.
I don't have any questions in the Q&A yet. I don't see anything. Oh, there is a question that says, where is the PPT located online? And it is on our website. And this slide deck will be circulated, so you'll get that information in the slide deck. But Marie, do you have the address handy?
Yeah, so it's bfvcanada.ca, and then we showed you at the top bar there was resources, and then you'll find the same tool under both the by name list page and the coordinated access page. If you don't have one in your change package, but the provider participation tool isn't a separate document, it's included right in that scorecard. So the scorecard includes, you know, some context information about the community, includes the by name list scorecard, the coordinated access scorecard, the provider participation tool, and then the information and results tab for provider participation. So you'll find it embedded in the scorecards and tools document.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, and Lisa has put the address in the chat for everybody.
That is perfect. Thanks,
Lisa. We have some questions for you. Let us know how we did with this webinar. And you can continue to put questions in the Q&A as well.
Yeah, so you can use your Zeetings to answer some of these questions, but I am super curious because I know people had some different ideas as they were answering some of those questions, and it's super helpful for others if we can surface some of those. There's no bad questions. They all help us understand more deeply the content, so we really welcome any questions you have.
As people are sort of chiming in on this, I'm waiting and watching the Q&A just in case anybody comes up with any other questions that they want to ask. Don't be shy. All right, as we wait, I'm going to ask you another question. Was this webinar a good use of your time?
And again, totally anonymous, and we really welcome your feedback. It helps us think about how to improve these webinars in the future.
Yeah, we cannot trace this back to you in any way, shape, or form. So please feel free to let us know how it went for you. Oh, we have a Q&A question. The question says, housing resources includes allowances even without any case management support? Or do housing resources include allowances even without any case management support?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I think any resource that a community can put in the middle of their coordinated access process to fill through that process. So in some cases, there have been communities where some subsidies have come available, and they might not yet have the services to pair with that. But you definitely can coordinate access to any of those resources. Oh, and I had something else to say, but maybe Jody, you're also having a thought.
No, I was just going to say one of the things that we wrote up on the slides before was depends. It can look however you set it up, as long as on the outset you've set it up that way. And so if that's what it includes, then yes. But what needs to be clear is that that's been put together, that it's been documented, and that everyone agrees on that, on how it's going to work. And keeping track of everything, I think it's important to just be clear that I've lost track of what I was saying mid-sentence, which is often awkward.
I'm going to come back to you, Jody.
Yeah, please do.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, because my thought came back to me was that, you know, when we think of coordinated access, it doesn't have to be just about resources for those with the highest level of acuity. Like, you can be coordinating resources and thinking about the needs of folks, you know, who are low, mid, or high level acuity or chronicity. Like, how do you coordinate access to all of those resources? So in some cases, it could just include a subsidy if your community has that available.
And that reminds me of what I was going to say. I think that when you're starting to track those resources, I think the biggest thing is to make what you are tracking manageable. And as you build it out, you may add more things to it. But I think that what happens is that in the very beginning, some communities want to capture every single thing they're doing. And that can become, in some communities, unwieldy to do. So.
Yeah. You know, and many have started sometimes with coordinating access to their housing first programs, but that's not, you know, that's a great start, and it's good to start small and grow from there, but that's not where it should end. How do you keep finding and bringing other resources to the table over time?
Yeah, exactly. This is a process. Leslie has a question for us. Leslie is asking, with the new housing, or with the new HIFIS release coming in the fall, they've heard that there's an added CAEH integration. Is there anything, Marie, that you can tell us about that regarding housing resources?
Yes, we have also heard that there is more functionality coming into HIFIS in the fall related to by name listing coordinated access. We don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know that when they roll that out, they're planning to have a series of webinars and information to help folks understand what that's all about. But until we see it, I'm also not sure exactly what that's going to look like. But, you know, there were some elements that HIFIS was not able to capture well, such as really clearly whether someone was chronically homeless or not, whether they were actively homeless or not, whether they were active, inactive. And so I think part of what they're doing is they build in that functionalities to make that information easier to capture and report.
Mm-hmm. We've got a new question up here. If you are still on Zeetings, please go ahead and vote whether or not today's webinar left you excited and inspired to continue working towards an end to homelessness. And if your excitement, inspiration towards ending homelessness is not directly related to our webinar, we will not be offended.
Yeah. And while people are filling that out, it would be super interesting if you're able to just put in the chat box, if you are already implementing coordinated access, like what kinds of things you are coordinating access to right now. It would be interesting to see the variety and what people are doing right now.
We have one last question in our feedback. This really helps us to make sure that we are tailoring everything that we do to the needs of communities across the country. So if you have any feedback that you'd like to share about today's webinar, the resources, the tools we've shared, things that you want more of, please let us know. Put in anything, any feedback is great feedback. Remember, it's anonymous, so you can write anything you'd like. We really, really value that information.
Hey, Jody, while people are filling that out, I'm curious, because you used to work in Victoria, and I'm not sure if they'd already implemented coordinated access. I'm thinking that they did. Do you know what kinds of things they were coordinating there?
Well, coordinated access in Victoria at the point that I was there was still a work in progress. But the supported housing piece in Victoria was really front and center. The folks that were at the table ranged from Island Health to the housing providers to mental health and addictions. It crossed the entire spectrum, and they were pulling in a lot of different providers and services that were available to the community. And Victoria, if anybody is following in the news, I'm not currently there right now, has a lot going on in terms of encampments and things that are happening. So I know that it's probably shifted very recently in the last few months, and I haven't been there during that time. So
that's great. So there's some things in the chat here from Ottawa, and I'm just going up. Got Anastasia saying there's been a lot of consultation with communities and moving forward coordinated access. Without fail, each resource we speak to would like that resource list to be public for reference, because no one in Regina knows who does what. And it's a major barrier to collaboration. So my question is, are there any technical tools outside of HMIS that communities have used to host this information so it's public? 211, help seeker, etc. That's a great question out to the group, I think, too. People are welcome to respond in the chat to these questions.
I think that however you share it, and one of the first things that comes to mind to me is however you share it, it needs to be done in a way that it will allow for it to be dynamic, because what I've found is that there's a lot of drive in communities to create manuals and or directories, and they are literally out of date the minute that they are published. So finding ways to make sure that if you are hosting this information, that there is a mechanism to make sure that it's updated. Because if it's public like this, it is going to be very valuable to the people who are using it, or critical to some people who are using it. And if it's not updated on a regular basis, then it's almost better not done that way. I don't know, what do you think, Maureen?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think like I would encourage people to do it, but I think, yeah, thinking about how do we keep it updated, because things continue to evolve. I'm also seeing a note here from Victoria and Ottawa talking about they implemented a coordinated approach to a recent housing blitz, which is super exciting. You know, they collected information on clients, and then they secured housing units, and then they matched people up. That's a great way to start, you know, getting going with coordinated access. Many years ago, I used to work in Waterloo region, and that's kind of what happened with us too. We did a registry week, and you know, at the outset, we said we have 40 new housing subsidies that we can match up, and we tried to match those up along with support of you know, case management support, you know, where we had that. But we basically said we're doing this blitz, and at the end of it, we have some resources that we're looking to prioritize, and that was a great way to kick it off.
Mm-hmm. And Carrie says that in BC, they need to work with BC Housing and BC Housing and their supportive housing and coordinated access programs. So that's another element of the BC. Yeah,
and that's a great point. Every, you know, province and the way that's set up for each community could definitely look a little differently. So this isn't like a one size all. There's lots of different models and options and ways people can organize their system in the way they do this.
Mm-hmm.
Have we seen any other questions come in?
We haven't, no.
Okay.
So I've moved to the thank you slide.
Yeah, we're probably wrapping this up. Big thank you to everyone who joined us, and Jody for being my co-conspirator in action here as we go through this presentation.
Yeah, it's always fun. It's great to see so many people from across the country. Thank you so much. I spotted a few of my communities on here. Shout out to all of you. Oh, we have one more message in the chat, and it just says, thanks for this presentation. Erin, you are more than welcome, as is everybody else on the call.
Great. So we will get a copy of the PDF and the recording note to everyone who signed up, and that'll also be on the TTA website.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Have a great rest of your day.
Yes.